Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with new developments surrounding Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve's building renovations in Washington. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is the latest Trump administration official to pile on. We get the very latest now from Bloomberg's John Tucker. Good morning, John.
And good morning, Nathan. Bessent says in a social media post there should be a review of the decision to renovate parts of the Federal Reserve headquarters in Washington. He also says the Fed should conduct what he calls an exhaustive internal review of its non-monetary policy operations. Well, this is just the latest salvo in the Trump administration's relentless attack on the Fed and its leader, Jerome Powell, mostly for refusing to bend to the president's will and lower interest rates. The probe into the headquarters renovation, which is now more than $700 million over budget, has stoked speculation it could provide a way for Donald Trump to fire Powell. Cost overruns for federal buildings in Washington are hardly unusual. A lesser-known Trump ally, meantime, Congresswoman Alina Paulina, has also jumped into the fray, urging the Justice Department to investigate Powell for allegedly misleading Congress about the cost overruns, even though there's no evidence of wrongdoing. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, as investors wait to see how the whole Powell saga plays out, stocks continue to reach new heights. The S&P 500 closed at yet another record high yesterday. Wells Fargo's top U.S. equity strategist Christopher Harvey says he expects the S&P 500 to deliver another double-digit increase in the second half of the year.
What we're seeing is the winners continue to win. The Uber cap companies have the higher margins, are gaining more market share. There is a real secular trade in AI that will continue. I was here during the 90s. This is not a fair comparison. It is much stronger and the fundamentals are much better than today than they were back then.
Harvey is the most bullish strategist tracked by Bloomberg, forecasting the S&P 500 will climb above 7,000 by the end of the year. It closed yesterday at just over 6,300 for the first time.
And Karen, Chris Harvey's not the only one bullish on U.S. equities. A cohort of the world's largest asset managers is leaning harder into the risk asset rally. Firms such as Invesco, Fidelity International, and J.P. Morgan Asset Management are reinforcing bullish bets across technology shares from the U.S. to Asia, as well as on emerging market assets. The high-octane wager is that while President Trump is threatening to disrupt the economic world order, he will step back from the brink.
Nathan, earnings continue to roll in with more than 30 companies in the S&P 500 reporting today, among them General Motors. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
GM is likely to report vehicle sales and market share in the U.S. grew during the second quarter, with a lot of help from EVs and lower-priced models like the Chevy Equinox small SUV. The automaker also likely to stress the biggest hit this year to its bottom line from President Trump's 25% tariffs on imported cars and auto parts. GM stated previously it expects upwards of $5 billion in tariff impact this year, a third of which it plans to offset through cost-cutting moves. Bloomberg consensus calls for revenue of $46.27 billion on adjusted earnings per share of $2.33. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
Tom, thanks. As the U.S. imposed deadline on tariff deals draws closer, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick met for more than 2 hours yesterday in Washington with Japan's chief trade negotiator. Barring a deal, universal tariffs on Japan's exports to the U.S. are set to rise to 25% on August 1st. That's up from the baseline 10% and an original 24% duty.
Well, Nathan, Microsoft is still trying to stop hackers wreaking global havoc after they exploited a flaw in the firm's software. Over the weekend, Microsoft released a fix for the vulnerability in servers of the SharePoint document management software, but say they're still working to repair other parts of the system. According to cybersecurity researchers, the flaw was used to break into the file systems of national governments in Europe, the Middle East, and the U.S.
Karen, BlackRock is restricting the use of company devices in China. In an internal memo seen by Bloomberg News, the world's largest asset manager told staff to use temporary loaner phones and not to bring company laptops to China on business trips. The changes come with growing jitters around business travel to China. U.S.-China geopolitical tensions are weighing on global financial firms.
Now, Nathan, to the latest on the Jeffrey Epstein case. It's starting to affect legislative business on Capitol Hill. Democrats on the House Rules Committee used a hearing on several Republican bills to call for amendments releasing files on the child sex offender. That forced Republicans to call off the hearing indefinitely, and it could mean the House heads into its summer recess early. At the White House, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked why President Trump has not called for a full release of the Epstein files.
The president has said if the Department of Justice and the FBI want to move forward with releasing any further credible evidence, they should do so. As to why they have or have not or will, you should ask the FBI about that.
Meanwhile, the White House says it will remove the Wall Street Journal from the small group of reporters who will be traveling with President Trump on his trip to Scotland later this month. The president is suing the paper over a report that he gave Epstein a suggestive birthday letter more than 20 years ago.
In other media news this morning, Karen, billionaire Patrick Soon-Shiong is planning to take the Los Angeles Times public over the next year. Soon-Shiong told Jon Stewart's The Daily Show he will allow the public to have ownership of the paper. If an initial public offering goes ahead, the LA Times would join the New York Times and News Corporation among the largest publicly traded news organizations.
And Nathan, Stephen Colbert appeared on his first Late Show since CBS announced it's canceling the program when his contract runs out in May. He used his opening monologue to declare the gloves are off against President Trump and CBS parent company Paramount Global.
Over the weekend, somebody at CBS followed up their gracious press release with a gracious anonymous leak saying they pulled the plug on our show because of losses pegged between $40 million and $50 million a year. $40 million is a big number. I could see us losing $24 million, but where would Paramount have possibly spent the other $16 million? Oh, yeah. Oh.
Stephen Colbert's reference there to Paramount's $16 million settlement with President Trump over a 60 Minutes interview he claimed was deceptively edited. The comedian also responded to the president's Truth Social post that he absolutely loved that Colbert got fired with an expletive. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. A federal judge has sentenced an ex-Kentucky police officer to 33 months in prison for using excessive force during the 2020 deadly Breonna Taylor raid. The judge declined a U.S. Justice Department recommendation that he should serve just 1 day. Brett Hagenson, who fired 10 shots during the raid but didn't hit anyone, was the only officer on the scene charged in the black woman's death. He is the first person sentenced to prison in the case that rocked the city of Louisville. Ben Crump is the Taylor family attorney.
We had the honor of fighting with this family for 5 years now to get equal justice.
Ben Crump says even though the family thought Hankinson should have gotten more prison time, they are grateful. New York City former interim police commissioner Thomas Donlan has filed a $10 million defamation claim against Mayor Eric Adams for reportedly suggesting he was mentally unfit for the job of top cop. The filing comes less than a week after Donlan sued Adams and his top deputies, accusing them of operating the department as a criminal racket that punished whistleblowers. A spokesperson for Adams dismissed the allegation as yet another frivolous attempt to seek compensation at the taxpayer's expense. The Pentagon has ordered the U.S. Marines to leave Los Angeles after more than a month in the city. The departure of the 700 Marines first deployed on June 9th during protests against the administration's immigration policies comes days after the military reduced the presence of the National Guard. Mayor Karen Bass says she appreciates the sacrifices the National Guard soldiers are making, but says there needs to be priorities.
We need the National Guard to assist us and prepare for fire season, not for an inappropriate deployment where they are just guarding a building that is not under attack.
Tributes continue to come in for actor Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show. Police say Warner died in an accidental drowning off Costa Rica's Caribbean coast, where he was on a family vacation. Malcolm Jamal Warner was 54. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Yankees went to Toronto 3 weeks ago, gave up 36 runs, lost all 4 games, and that's why in their return, they trailed the Blue Jays by 3 games. They scored first, 4th inning.
First pitch, drive to deep left. That's hit well. Going back, Snyder, running out of room. Goodbye. into the bullpen. Big G, Giancarlo Stanton gives the Yankees a 1-0 lead, leading off the fourth.
On WFM, but that was the Yankees' only run. They had only 4 other hits. Toronto scored 4 times in the fifth. The Bo Bichette 2-run double, and then consecutive throwing errors by the left side of the Yankee infield. Oswald Peraza and Anthony Volpe, who leads the league in errors. The Blue Jays won 4-1. At Citi Field, Mets trailed the Angels 4-0, 5-2 in the seventh. The Juan Soto 2-run single tied the game in the eighth. Big double by Francisco Alvarez, just back from the minors. Mets had runners at second and third.
They bring the left-hander Brock Burke into pitch, and Carlos Mendoza is going to stick with Ronnie Mauricio.
He's 3 for 26 against left-handers, Garrett. The infield's in.
And Ronnie pulls one to third. Grabbed on a hop. The throw home by McCutcheon. It gets away. Beatty scores. Alvarez will stop at third. Wow. And the Mets take the lead in the bottom of the eighth.
On SNY, they scored again, won 7-5. The go-ahead run scoring on a play at the plate after grounded to third in the eighth, just as was the case in the win Sunday over Cincinnati. Mets still trail the Phillies by a half game. The Phils beat the Red Sox 3-2 on a walk-off catcher's interference call, 10th inning. First time a game has ended like that since 1971. The Nationals topped the Reds 10-8. 11th win in a row for now first place Milwaukee, 6-0 at Seattle. Chris Paul says his 21st season in the NBA will likely be his last. At age 40, he signed with the LA Clippers. Caitlin Clark still has the groin injury, won't play for Indiana in Brooklyn tonight against the Liberty. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager, and there is little let up this morning to the Trump administration's pressure on the Fed and Chair Jerome Powell. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is now among those calling for a full review at the central bank with a focus on its $2.5 billion renovation. But White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt says President Trump's pressure on Powell will only go so far.
He has no plans to fire the Fed chair, but he has been very transparent in expressing his displeasure with Jerome Powell's management of the Fed and also his policies.
White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt joining us this morning. Terry Haynes, the founder of Pangea Policy. Terry, it's great to speak with you. In Secretary Bessent's social media post calling for this review, he said, quote, significant mission creep and institutional growth have taken the Fed into areas that potentially jeopardize the independence of its core monetary policy mission. What do you make of this angle of the pile-on that we're seeing on Chairman Powell? Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nathan. A couple of things. One is that, I'm a big believer that Powell stays, and I told markets last week 7 reasons why that was the case. And on top of it, I find Bessent's doing here interesting because Bessent is not going after, as he said, the core monetary policy functions of the Fed. He's looking at the Fed as a kind of the standard regulatory stuff that the Fed does, and it's entirely appropriate for the Congress, the president, to be looking at those functions, and it's entirely appropriate to want to try to figure out how they can best make the Fed focus on its core mission. I look at it as a little less meddling, but at root, it's still the same kind of irritant that won't get Trump anywhere because, fundamentally, what we're trying to do here is move blame from Trump onto Powell for the stubbornness of inflation.
This kind of review that Secretary Bessent is calling for sounds like the kind of thing that could linger into the next Federal Reserve chairman. Do you expect something like that to fall on the plate of whoever President Trump appoints next?
Oh, I do expect that, firstly. Secondly, I think it's overdue. It's been a quarter of a century or more since the Fed has undertaken a real serious look at exactly what it does comprehensively and how it does. And thirdly, I'll point out at least some candidates, former Governor Warsh that comes to mind first, have been calling for exactly that kind of revamp.
Congresswoman Republican Anna Paulina Luna has called for a criminal referral for Fed Chairman Powell over his testimony about the renovation. Do you see that going anywhere?
I don't. I think it's unserious. Powell, the core of Luna's concern is allegedly Powell committing perjury in front of the committee on the renovations. If you look at the statements that she cites and the context, There's absolutely no basis for that. I think this is not legal advice, but there isn't any basis for it. And I think it frankly backfires on Luna and on Trump particularly. If the Justice Department investigates, they find nothing. If they refuse to investigate, Luna looks foolish. So either way, it's a bad look.
In our last minute, Terry, it looks like the Jeffrey Epstein case is affecting policymaking on Capitol Hill with this House Rules Committee hearing getting stalled over Democrats calling for a full release of the Epstein files. Where do you see this going?
Well, I see people, first, they're all going to Reagan National to get flights as quickly as possible. Secondly, I think they've tied themselves into knots on this, and Congress is good at tying itself into knots. I think what ends up happening is basically they're going pencils down for the August recess with the idea that Bondi or somebody's going to be able to release a lot of files, and when they release a lot of files, it takes the political pressure off the warring sides of the House.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.